What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast. Today I'm talking to Elina Winnel. Elina has helped thousands of people across the globe to improve their sleep. After overcoming chronic insomnia herself, she dedicated her life to helping others reclaim consistent quality sleep. She is regularly featured in the media, including all major television stations and newspapers. Her approach goes well beyond the superficial, to uncover what truly lies beneath a great night's sleep, enabling people to truly transform their sleep even when they believed it was not possible. Elina is the founder of The Sleep Expert. She's an incredible human and I'm very excited to have her here with me today. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast, Elina. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Same. It's like a beautiful winter's afternoon in Sydney and we are sitting here in my little sunny study. So I'm feeling really relaxed and ready for our conversation.
And it's perfect. Soul sunshine. The sun is shining on us today.
Always. So Elina, before we are heading into our conversation today, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today we are talking all about sleep. We are talking about Elina's story and why she is personally so passionate about supporting other people to have a great night of sleep. We are exploring the myths of sleep and the true causes behind insomnia. We are also diving deep into how the nervous system is connected to sleep and what we can do on a holistic level to better our sleep. Elina shares some key elements of her revolutionary sleep system and how her work can support you on your journey to become your own sleep expert. So very exciting. Sleep, I think, is a really, really important topic for all of us. Yes, I'm really excited about jumping into this with you today.
Yeah, great. Me too.
So, Elina, we met a couple of months ago. We met at the beginning of the year at one of the coaching room NLP trainings. And I remember talking to you in one of the breaks and, somehow hearing that you're a sleep expert and, just chatting along. And actually, I think the reason why you stood out to me while we were all standing there, having our cups of tea was because you were wearing an Oura ring as well.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, hello, we've got the same Oura ring. That's why I kind of was connecting. And then, and I think you at that point were already talking to people about sleep. And I'm like, oh, have a look at my data. And you looked at my data and you were like, oh, this is not good. And I was like, oh no, because I think that I sleep really, really well actually. But we'll get to that later. I think that's a really interesting one that we can kind of dissect today about, people who think they sleep really well, but what's actually really going on.
Exactly. That will be interesting.
So I'm looking forward to that. But before we head there, Elina, let's just start with, tell us a little bit about your background. What is your story and where did this passion for sleep come from?
Well, originally, my career started in the corporate world. So I, studied commerce, did an MBA and was working in marketing and finance. So very, very different initial career. And I went through a period where I went through chronic insomnia. And I went to specialist after specialist, expert after expert, doctor after doctor, trying to get help to resolve the issue. And I spent thousands. I saw so many people and I could not find solutions to the issue. And it absolutely destroyed my life at the time. So it was a real journey for me. It opened me up to very different ways of being, very different knowledge to what I was exposed to previously. And basically I ended up quitting that career, my first career, and studying anything and everything that helped me with my sleep. And look, it was a long and painful journey because it was so hard to get good help. But coming through the other end, I was determined to help other people so they didn't have to go through that same painful journey that I went through that was totally unnecessary, really. Because actually it's not that hard to heal your sleep if you kind of have the right tools and the right knowledge and the right self-awareness. So that's why I'm passionate about it today, because it was such a painful journey for me. I don't want others to go through that and sleep is so important to our well-being.
Yeah.
You know, we spend a lot of time getting our diet right or getting our exercise right, but how much time do we actually put into making sure our sleep is the optimal level?
I know, right?
And like you mentioned with your own sleep, you know, it's kind of like you thought you slept well, but I know we'll talk about it later, but looking at the numbers, it's like, oh, you're not getting a lot of deep sleep. So we often don't stop and question these things. You know, what is the quality of my sleep like? Is it as good as what it could be? Because sleep also is absolutely essential to staying young. It's essential to our body healing and regenerating. You know, during the daytime we break down, and during sleep we regenerate and heal. So it's just so important. Yeah. And I would actually argue, and perhaps I'm biased, but that it's more important than diet or exercise.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, pretty much half of our lives we are asleep, right? Kind of. Give or take,
or a third.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably more. For me, it's probably half. But yeah, so I mean, it obviously is really important. So I'm really interested when you said that, you know, you went through this difficult time in your life, you know, trying to find solutions in order to cure your own insomnia. Like, what was the challenge? Why do you feel like you didn't get what you needed out there in the world?
It's a really good question. So I didn't understand what made up a good night's sleep. And when I went out to get help, I was referred to sleep hygiene type things like, oh, cut out coffee, you know, go to bed at the same time every night. And I would just look at these, you know, supposed sleep experts or specialists and just say to them, do you really think I haven't tried that? Like, that wasn't the cause of my struggle with sleep. And they just didn't have the understanding. So people gave me superficial supposed solutions. And part of it, I guess, was they didn't understand it themselves. You know, they're reading from a textbook essentially, but also there was a lack of understanding of the root causes of why people struggle with sleep. So really the solutions that were presented at the time were, working with a superficial level, not the root cause. And so, today the very first thing I do with people is look at what's the root cause of your struggle with sleep. Because working on the superficial level, unless you get really lucky, you're probably not going to change your sleep very much. Yeah.
And like from your experience, when you're talking superficial things like, you know, quitting coffee, going to bed at the same time every night, I mean, that's things that we always hear, right? And you're saying there is something deeper behind it, you know, there's something more behind it. So what do you find in your experience are some of those root causes that are actually the reason why people are not finding a restful night of sleep?
So just an invitation first to anyone listening right now. If you don't sleep well, to stop and ask yourself why. What is your perspective? Do you know why you don't sleep well? Right? So it's really important first just to do your own inquiry into that. Because if you believe it's because one of those superficial things, then probably you're just referencing what you've read out there or what you've been told. And the invitation is to really go inside and ask yourself, like, be really honest with yourself, why is it? So through my exploration and my journey, one of the key things that I have found impacts people's sleep is the autonomic nervous system. So how imbalanced someone's nervous system is. And these days, a lot of people are sympathetic dominant. So basically that's the stress response, and parasympathetic underdeveloped. So they aren't very skilled at relaxing deeply. And people often say to me, I know how to relax, but they actually don't. Like, once I've worked with them, they have a whole different definition of what relaxation is.
Like, but I'm relaxed.
Yes, it's a bit like that. Exactly. I'm relaxed. And a bit like, you know, if I'll sort of challenge someone about, you know, their stress levels, I'll be like, I'm not stressed. It's like, you know, really, when we get used to being in a certain state, we cannot realize it's happening. So people today, I find, often don't realize just how stressed they are. Yeah. And anxiety fits into that category as well, right? So if we're stressed or anxious and we don't know how to truly relax, then the autonomic nervous system goes out of balance. You can think of it as the master regulator. So we need a nervous system that's in balance to be able to sleep well and to sleep deeply as well. Yeah,
it's interesting when you say that people don't realize that they are stressed. I mean, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear from you, but it's like we live in quite a stressful world, you know, the Western world that we've created for ourselves. And it's like people are just running on empty the whole time, and they don't even realize that they're doing that, and so when they
running on adrenaline and cortisol.
Right? Exactly. So when they go to sleep and they're not able to sleep, they're like, oh, it must be that coffee that I drank at 2 o'clock, it's maybe not like the way that I live my life. It must be the coffee,
Exactly. So the coffee really is just exacerbating a bigger underlying problem.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
So, if your nervous system is imbalanced, you can drink coffee. It will have a minimal impact. I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't drink coffee, but 1 or 2 coffees isn't going to make a big difference. But if your nervous system's out of balance and then you drink coffee on top of that, of course, then it's going to have an impact, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot that goes into whether or not our nervous system's in balance. So, we'll have physical stress, we'll have mental stress, which is an inside job. So I hear what you're saying. We do live in a hectic world these days, but also it's about how we process things internally. There's emotional stress, energetic stress, the Wi-Fi and 5G and all of that today. So there's stress on multiple levels, And really, it's like to really look at how we're creating stress or where stress from the external environment's coming in and how we start to reduce that and bring ourselves back into balance.
So it's really about that nervous system regulation in order to then be able to have a restful night of sleep, right?
Yeah, so there'll be a direct correlation between our nervous system, how imbalanced it is, and our sleep. So the sleep's more like the symptom of the problem, right? Yeah. And it's not that stress is the issue or lack of relaxation. It's about our ability to move between the two, right? So sure, we have stress in our lives and we create stress, but then, to be able to shift out of that and move into deep relaxation. So it's about our ability to move between the two, because stress also has benefits, right?
Yes.
So it's having healthy stress and healthy relaxation and moving between the two. So as you say, regulating.
Yeah. So what would you recommend to somebody who is listening to this now and going like, oh, maybe it is my nervous system and the fact that I'm constantly stressed and overwhelmed with life, that I, can't find a good night of sleep. Like, what would be some of the first things that you would suggest to somebody that's, hearing that for the first time, that might have thought, it's the afternoon coffee that's doing this, or the whatever it may be, but no, it's like, suddenly that realization of, maybe I do need to regulate my nervous system. What should I do?
So first of all, I'd say just start to attune to your nervous system. So first of all, where is your nervous system at? So right now, people can just check in with their breathing. Are they breathing more from the upper chest or from the belly, right? Are they breathing slow or fast? Are they breathing low or high, deep or shallow? So most people today, if you watch, will be high, fast, shallow breathers, right? And again, this is another thing they'll say they're breathing from their tummy when they're not. So like you really try to be as honest and objective with yourself as possible. Yeah. So now our breathing is again a symptom, it's not the cause. Yeah. But that's a first step of creating awareness. What's your breathing like? And then hopefully then if you notice, I am actually breathing more from my chest, or I am breathing fast, then that's a time to go, well, hang on. So maybe my nervous system is out of balance. Maybe there's some work to be done around that. Then, so I think more to your question, then how do you bring the nervous system back into balance? Well, there's a lot to that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, interestingly on that, most people again will look at environmental factors, and in my experience, it's the internal world that creates the stress the most. So the way that we think and filter the world, our reality, is what creates stress more than anything else. If I could only work with one thing with people, it will be on shifting the way they think.
Yeah. So it's looking at their belief systems and,
how they think. So for example, and I think we chatted about this, is a pattern in terms of the way that people think who are poor sleepers. Some common patterns will be, and it's not true for everyone, but some common patterns will be doing a lot of worst case scenario. Yeah. So catastrophizing.
So now we're just to tell our listeners, now we're diving into NLP patterns that are potentially connected to a lack of sleep. And you said there's a couple of them that in your experience that you see when people have those patterns, when they're leaning towards them, then they're not great sleepers. Just so that to let people know what they're setting up.
And so the connection is that if someone catastrophizes a lot, for example, or if, just as one example, then that will trigger the flight response, which is putting the nervous system out of balance, right? Yes. So when we're in fight or flight, that's the sympathetic nervous system, then it's going to be harder to sleep because your body doesn't feel safe to sleep. Yeah. So that's how the thought pattern then connects in with the nervous system and with sleep, right? Our primary objective is survival. So why would the body let us go to sleep if it's thinking of something that is perceived to be danger? Yeah. But it becomes so common, so habitual that people don't realize they're doing it. They might be thinking about, their boss didn't like their project, or, a deadline that they might miss, or, something like that. So there's a perception of danger. And then that either means that sleep is harder to achieve, or it's harder to get into that really deep restorative sleep. So, What
are some of the other patterns? You said, so it's the worst case thinker.
Yeah.
So it's like when we're looking at NLP patterns as well, just for our audience. So there's always like a bit of a scale as well. And then there's best case scenario person on the left and worst case scenario person on the right. And the ideal would be to have that kind of continuum of being able to move between those two, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of what we want to see. But for people that are then leaning towards the worst case scenario, that's then the people that are potentially not getting the good night of sleep. So what are some of those other patterns when we're talking from an NLP point of view that you see coming up in people that are not finding a restful night of sleep?
So external reference, so in other words, placing more importance on what someone else thinks, believes, perceives, or feels compared to your own. So if someone is constantly referencing others rather than self, that can be another big stressor, because it's disempowering, right? Like, you're referencing others. And we need to feel sort of powerful to be able to feel safe to sleep.
Yeah.
Again, so it constantly comes back to
safety,
danger
right?
versus safety. Yeah. And bringing that nervous system back into balance. So that's another one. Another one is options. So it's like when people think about, I've got to do this. Whoa, and the brain just goes into overdrive, right? So how can we sleep when the brain's so busy? Okay.
That might be me.
Yeah.
My husband is sometimes like, Jesus, can you just sleep? Like, what are you thinking about? And I'm like, because all the things coming into my mind, and I'm like, I feel like I need to communicate them more just as we got to bed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Not the greatest thing for sleep. Yeah. Another one can be a real preference on doing rather than being. So, and one thing I forgot to mention, which is really important, the quality of our sleep is determined by the quality of our day, not that hour or two before bed. So that's really important to understand. So it's like your stress levels throughout the day will affect what your quality of sleep is like. So why I'm mentioning that now is the doing versus being. So I don't want people to just think about what they're doing that hour or two before bed. Okay. But what I am going to mention is something that people do in bed, which is thinking about doing. And that's not a great thing to do when you're in bed, because the system doesn't know the difference between what we're thinking and kind of reality, right? So if you have thoughts of doing, then it will start to produce stress hormones in the system, because our system believes we need to move into action. That's what stress hormones are there for. Yeah, so if someone's got a pattern of thinking about doing a lot, then that will also affect sleep. So there are examples of the patterns that will affect how well someone sleeps.
But it's really interesting, right? Because it really comes back to a full mindset shift, and the working through some of those, patterns and some of those things that we have inhibited over our life, that are subconsciously running us a lot of the time, that we are not even really aware of. It's like, you might go to bed thinking, I hope my boss likes the presentation, or, or I hope my client was happy with my call, or whatever it is, but really they are all things that keep you from a good night's sleep, because they're all keeping you in that sympathetic nervous system, right?
Yeah, and most people, understandably don't know what their patterns are. And everyone has sort of 5 to 10 habitual patterns of thinking that are repeated over and over and over, hundreds of times a day. So, sometimes people will start to get some insight because their loved ones might say something like, you catastrophize a lot, or you're always talking about what other people think, So you might get clues in there, but often people don't really know how their brains run. So that's a really important step in the process of getting better sleep if you're a poor sleeper.
Yeah, and first of all, they might not even know it, and it's completely, subconscious. And even if they know it, I think even though the awareness is important, but it's really hard to change some of those patterns that have been so deeply seated within ourselves.
Yes, well, they feel real.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Like a lot of my clients, when we talk about the catastrophizing, they're like, but because it's serving a purpose, All right. So until someone really understands
the positive intention behind it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Until someone understands that, and then it's hard to let it go.
Yeah.
So understanding the positive intention and how you start to change those patterns of thinking.
So how do we do that? Like, when people are like now listening to this going like, okay, I've got some patterns that I'm aware of, like what's the best way of doing that? Is it like it's internal work, it's self-development, it's really like what you said at the beginning, that real deep self-inquiry of what's going on within you and how you're working and how you're functioning and what it is that might actually hold you back, not just in sleep but also in life, right? Because those patterns would not just come up during the night, they would be there, during the day as well. They would come up in different scenarios.
Exactly. Yeah, look, and the truth is with this, you can try and work on it yourself, great. But really, I do recommend seeing a professional with these kinds of things because it's hard to really experience ourselves objectively.
Yeah.
So, someone who really is experienced with this kind of thing can go, right, here you go, these are the patterns, they can reflect them back. Something that might take you years to figure out, you can do in, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think something like that, it's important to get some professional help as well, if you are struggling.
Yeah. And I think that's where NLP is really beautiful. I don't have words today. I don't know what's going on with my words today.
Because you didn't sleep well last night. That's
probably
it. Right, because...
And I'm premenstrual, so it's like all coming together. I'm like, might as well just stop talking now.
But sleep does affect our memory and our cognition and our response times. And so everything that's happening to you right now is totally normal for when we don't sleep well.
Yeah.
The connections in the brain, they don't work as well, So, so it's a really good example of what happens when we don't get enough good sleep.
Yeah.
So I kind of love that that's happening to you today, not from a...
You love that I didn't sleep well.
but just so people really, it's like, where does this happen to you? Like for people to stop and really start to understand how much their lives are impacted by not having optimal sleep levels.
Yeah, and what's really interesting for me, and I think we talked about that when we had our pre-chat, is this whole just getting on with things and just thinking that it's normal and just living with it. And I told you this story about, myself not having felt really well at the beginning of this year, and having really struggled physically. And then I ended up doing blood tests and doing all sorts of different things to make sure that there was nothing like actually wrong with me. And that all was fine. And then I ended up going back to my chiropractor. And, she was like, oh my God, you're so misaligned, So she really helped align my spine again so that everything could flow again. And it just made the biggest difference. And I remember lying there on my, I don't know, however many sessions, and it really starting to help me again and support me again. And me saying to her, how do people do it without that? Like, I don't know if I could live without that anymore,
Yeah.
And she said, well, that's exactly the problem. People can't, but they think it's normal. They don't know the difference. They're like, what you can feel like because you have felt good and because we've done so much work together. So when you don't feel good, you come back,
So you had the contrast.
I had the contrast, exactly. But some people don't have the contrast. It's the norm.
And they don't know.
They're just like, well, this is just what I have to live with now. This is like me getting older. This is me getting whatever, you're making up all those stories in your head why things are a certain way.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you're just looking for excuses because really it doesn't have to be this way. And when we were talking about sleep, like that example really kind of stood out to me because it's the same thing with sleep. People are looking for excuses, so-called excuses, because they just don't know what else to do. They've already cut the coffee in the afternoon and they've already done a few, superficial things on the outside. They're like, why can I still not sleep? Well, maybe that's just me, whatever. And they just keep going and they just learn to live with no sleep.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a real shame because everybody can be sleeping well.
Yeah.
And I hear, person after person just saying, oh, well, it's just the way I am, or, oh, it's in my family, or, oh, there's nothing I can do about it. And none of those things are true.
It's actually really interesting when you say it's in my family, because we talked about that as well. And it's the fact that, well, yeah, it might be in your family, but where does it actually come from? It's not that sleep is like, not that you're getting...
It's not genetic.
Exactly. Yeah. Sleep is not genetic, but what are some of the other things that have been passed down through generations that you might be carrying that is disenabling you.
Exactly. Yeah. So often there'll be anxiety, which the patterns of anxiety will be conditioned from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
For example, but that's not necessarily a genetic thing, you know. And it's really important for people to understand that, because otherwise people are disempowered.
Yeah.
Right. So when you understand it's a pattern or a habit as opposed to, oh, it's in my genes, well, then you're empowered because you know you can change it, and you can.
Yes.
So important to know
And I
that.
love how you said that as well, you know, looking at your own story and you going like, well, I had really bad insomnia and nobody could help me, but I didn't want to listen to that. I didn't want to take that as an answer. I kept going and I kept looking for solutions, because you knew
I was so
that
stubborn.
there was something else
I
out
knew
there,
it.
right?
At some level, I just knew there was an answer, and I'm lucky that I was so stubborn, because I wouldn't be around today if I wasn't. So that strong will, you know, basically meant I found answers, but it was a painful journey. But so I really want to help empower people to know, you know, there's always something you can do. It's not true that you can't improve your sleep. There's always something you can do. And you also touched on something interesting before about the energy system of the body. So having a spine that is aligned, where you've got good energy flow in the body, that's important to sleep, because there's an energetic component to sleep. And so, you know, like our brain waves are important, the energy flow in the body is important. So I just thought it's important to also highlight that, because if the energy system of the body is out of balance, that will affect our sleep. So our spine's important, our breathing's important. We might have even, I think we spoke about having good breathing. Basically what that does, when we breathe well, there's more cerebral spinal fluid that travels up the spine. And this happens all throughout the day.
Oh, wow.
And then at night time, basically what happens is the brain gets flushed out and detoxified, and that's with the cerebral spinal fluid that's moved through the system during the day. So with that breathing, the cerebral spinal fluid goes up to the brain, and at night, our brain gets flushed out. So, you know, like when you've had a really good deep sleep and your brain just feels really clear and fresh, it's had a really good flushing out, and the toxins are removed and all that gunk is removed from the brain.
But it's really interesting. So that comes through the day, you're breathing it up through your spine, and at night it detoxifies your brain, and then you wake up.
Because every time you breathe, your spine's moving, and that pumps the cerebral spinal fluid up.
And so if you're just breathing shallow, right, and just up here, there's no spinal fluid that can be moved up, because you're not using your whole body to breathe.
Exactly. It's a lot more limited. You don't get as good a flush, basically. And that's so valuable. You know, when people have foggy brains, and I hear this all of the time, foggy brains. I'm not saying this is the cause of foggy brain, but it's one of them, right? So again, that connects back to the nervous system, because how we're breathing is determined usually by our nervous system.
And I mean, that foggy brain just resonates with me so much as well, you know, having two little children, and like having had, you know, years of, and I mean, I can't even complain that much, to be honest. My children are usually pretty good sleepers, but, you know, still having interrupted sleep over like the last 8 years now almost. And, you know, even just the fact that you are a parent and that you are a mother specifically, I think it's almost like you're always sleeping with one eye open, because you're always listening out for what you were talking about before, you know, that danger, you know. You might not have necessarily anything in your head, but every creak or every noise or everything that you hear in the apartment, you go like, what was that? Because you want your babies to be safe, right? So you're not going into that deep sleep because you are constantly like half awake. And it's really interesting, because my husband never hears anything, right? He's always like, oh, I don't know what you're hearing. And then when I'm away for work or something and he's at home by himself with the kids, it's him. Because he has to take over the protector role. He's like, oh, now I know what you're talking about. I could hear everything last night. You know, so it's really interesting. And then being a mother and then waking up and having that, you know, you always hear that mum brain or whatever they call it. Do they call it mum brain?
Yeah, and that
you
keeps
know, it's
you
that
in a
foggy brain, you know, of like just knowing you did not get enough rest. You know, your head's not really working properly.
Yeah, it's tough for mums. I mean, it keeps you in a shallower sleep. So a lot of mums won't get as much deep sleep. Because you're right, you're kind of like listening out for your kids, you know, making sure they're safe and everything. But one thing I will say is that once kids are old enough for you to be able to sleep through the night, and it's really important to retrain yourself to sleep through the night, because the number of mothers I speak to that used to sleep well before they had
Yes.
kids. They have kids, they get used to broken sleep, then they think that's normal, and they don't return back to unbroken sleep.
Yeah.
So it actually requires often, not always, often requires a conscious effort to retrain yourself to sleep through the night again.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. I hear that a lot from my friends, saying that I just was never able to sleep anymore since I've had the kids, It's like they're just kind of in this really bad pattern of not being able, like the kids are sleeping now, yes, but you are not sleeping,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it that can be done there?
So,
as an example, I mean, I know we're going to go into that a bit more anyway in terms of what can be done for better sleep, but
really, mums are still in that kind of slightly like more alerted state of awareness, right? So they're kind of more in high alert, listening out for their kids. So once kids are sleeping through the night, it's really important to retrain the nervous system to calm down. So when you wake up, it's like retrain your nervous system to, maybe practice some slow, deep breathing, something like that. So you learn to calm yourself again. And gradually over time, you can retrain your nervous system to get into those more deeply relaxed states so you can start to sleep through the night. So you kind of want to retrain yourself out of that state of high alert to be more just deeply relaxed and just remind yourself, actually, I don't need to be in this state of alertness anymore.
Yeah.
And again, these things, they become patterns, so people forget to question them. So bring the awareness in. I don't need to be in this state of alertness anymore, and retrain yourself to relax more deeply, and you can train yourself out of it. Yeah.
And I think I told you the story. I was away a while ago for work, and we were sleeping in this like crappy motel. I was sleeping on this single crappy motel bed. And I woke up and I had the best night of sleep. Even my Oura ring was like amazing deep sleep, everything amazing. And I was like, oh, that was so good, And it was really interesting for me because, just being away from home and knowing that, first of all, nobody's going to wake you up, and, you don't have to look out for anybody. That was really interesting for me, just having that night. And that happens to me a lot when I'm away for a night. I'm like, I have the best night of sleep.
Well, and it's fascinating because your kids don't wake you up anymore during the night.
No, sometimes they do.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah, they want to come in for a cuddle, and then I have to ship them back into their bed and come back.
But you don't need to be in that state of high alert anymore.
No.
So it's interesting because when you're away from home, somehow you allow yourself to move out of that state of high alert. So it'd be interesting for you to look at, well, can you do that at home now? What's stopping you from doing that at home? How can you start to shift that? Because you don't need to be. And it's beautiful because it just shows you can sleep through the night.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
I can. And that's why it's a good segment to go into case study Sylvia.
Yes, let's do case study Sylvia.
Because, like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, so I do really think that I'm a good sleeper. Like, yes, I do get woken up once, maybe twice sometimes from the kids. Sometimes I don't get woken up at all. But generally speaking, I have no issue falling asleep. I usually sleep more or less through the night. Sometimes I might have to go to the bathroom or the kids come in or something. And I sleep quite a lot. It's not that I only get like 5 hours of sleep. Sometimes I get like 8-9 hours of sleep, right? And then I wake up and I'm still exhausted. And I'm like, what's going on? Because it's like, I'm having this sleep. And, it's not like, my husband goes like, you went to bed at 8 o'clock last night. Like, what's wrong with you, And I wake up in the morning and I'm still exhausted. But then, I guess the question behind this is like, what qualifies as a good night's sleep? What makes up a good night of sleep? Because we know there is REM sleep, there is, deep sleep, there's light sleep. Like, there's all those different elements, and we can go a bit more into that. And what is it that qualifies as a good night of sleep, and why and how? Why does sometimes a night with 5 hours sleep feel better than a night with 9 hours sleep, let's say?
Yeah. So
there's a lot of questions in there, sorry, but
let's dive into it. So it will depend on what's happening for the person, but a good night's sleep, you really want to get a certain amount of deep sleep. Like, that's the most important thing about sleep, right? If we're going to prioritize. So getting adequate deep sleep. Like, some people fall off their chair when I say I get more than 3 hours of deep sleep at night.
I'm so jealous. I'm actually genuinely jealous. So just in comparison, like, I probably get on average an hour. Like sometimes I get 45 minutes, sometimes I get an hour 15, but I would say on average I probably get an hour of deep sleep. When I get more than an hour, even if it's an hour and 10, I'm like, oh my God, I feel great. When I have less than an hour, I really feel it.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So you want to be getting at least 2 hours of deep sleep.
Because it's the regenerative sleep, right?
Yeah. So basically, here's how it works. So deep sleep heals us on a physical level. So these are generalizations, but it's really working on a physical level. So it's the most fundamental healing that we need, okay? Then the sort of in-between sleep will heal us mentally and emotionally. And then REM sleep, you're kind of consolidating memory, and there's emotional healing in that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so deep sleep's so important. So you could get, like you say, 9 hours of sleep, but if you're not getting enough deep sleep, you'll still feel terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say the amount of deep sleep is just as important as the quantity of sleep that, overall quantity that you're getting. It's also important to get the other phases of sleep. I don't want to take away from the importance of those, because we need to also heal mentally and emotionally and energetically. So, some people, who are into sleep hacks will say you only need certain phases of the sleep cycle. It's just not true. We were designed to have all phases of the sleep cycle because they all play a role.
Different role, yeah.
Yeah.
And an important role, right?
An important role, yeah. And so, science now is showing the links between lack of sleep and Alzheimer's and dementia and all these kinds of things. So even with that, someone could get, a good amount of deep sleep, but they're only sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, and then it's affecting their brain health. So, all of the phases of sleep play a role.
So you really want to get enough deep sleep, and you said by enough, that's about 2 hours. Does that verify between people, or is that more like a standard? People should be getting about 2 hours.
So if someone's unwell, like they've got something that needs to be healed, like say they've got a physical ailment, they may need more deep sleep because that is our physical healing time. But as a generalization, roughly a couple of hours of deep sleep.
Then we've got REM sleep, and then it's also important that we have, in terms of hours, what's like a minimum
so
of hours?
In terms of hours, you want to get minimum 7 hours of sleep. So between 7 and 9 is a healthy range. Yeah.
And so if one of these, it's like the pillars, right? If one of these pillars is not quite right, you will feel the effect.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah, exactly. So if someone's not getting enough lighter sleep or enough REM sleep, they may be unbalanced mentally or emotionally, right? So so they're all these pillars are important. But usually what's lacking for most people these days is adequate deep sleep.
Yeah. And in terms of tracking it, I mean, we've got the Oura Ring, which is apparently one of the most accurate ones. I don't know if you can sign that based on your experience. Then you've also got all the sports watches and stuff that record sleep. What's your experience in terms of, sleep tracking and how people can actually get an understanding of where their deep sleep is at? Because people are probably like, well, I have no idea. If you don't have one of those devices, how do you know? And if you would recommend the device, what would it be?
So I always encourage people to check in with how they feel first.
Yeah.
So, how clear is your brain in the morning? What are your energy levels like? What's your mood like? All of these things are affected by sleep. So check in with that first. Where that gets a little tricky is sometimes if people are used to a certain way, they may not realize, like we were talking about before, the contrast, they may not realize if they're deficient in something. So always check in with how you feel, because it's so important for us to get to know ourselves as humans, like to really be able to, if we didn't have technology, how would we gauge these things, right?
And right? Because when I get up, I'm like, I had such a good sleep. And then I look at my data and I'm like, I knew it. Like, I had such a good night of sleep. And the opposite is the same thing, Like this morning I woke up and I'm like, I just did not have a good night of sleep. And then, I look at the data and it's like, it just tells me the same thing pretty much. Once you're attuned to your body, you kind of understand it,
Exactly, yeah. So what's important is for us to be able to be objective to how we feel also, which can be a little difficult. So checking in with self first. Then in terms of the actual technology and the data, look, they all vary. I kind of don't want to necessarily say one's better than the other. Yes, I, at the moment, use an Oura Ring like you do, and that does give some really good data. You want to be measuring your heart rate variability, because that's a good gauge as to how in balance your nervous system is. So you don't want to just be looking at your sleep data also. So something that tracks your heart rate variability is really, really helpful. So, yeah. Look, for some people, when they look at technology, it can stress them out. So,
yes, I know, right?
Check in with what's true for you, because if it's going to stress you, that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
But if you're able to just be objective to it, look at it like a scientist and kind of go, okay, this is where I can improve, then it can be super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting because when you said that to me at the course, I was like, oh God, like my data is so bad. It stressed me out for a second. And my heart rate variability is actually... yeah, it's really bad, but I don't feel that,
you've probably got used to it, right?
Yeah,
and that's
probably
when we don't
constantly
notice
on.
it.
I agree
Yes,
with that.
constantly on. Yeah,
But,
exactly. Yeah. And so that will be correlated to the lack of deep sleep that you get. So your heart rate variability score could be improved, right? So let's just say it's not optimal, and that is a sign that your nervous system's out of balance, and that will cause lack of deep sleep. So let's say, for example, we were working together, I'd want to work with you on how you bring your nervous system into balance so you can get that deep restorative sleep again, and then you would wake up feeling much more refreshed in the mornings.
You just said, like, I probably got used to it, but what are some of the signs that people usually can feel during the day that are signs of, not getting enough sleep or having an overactive nervous system? Like, what are some of the things that you'd be like, okay, if this happens to you, there's a sign for you that you need to regulate your nervous system?
So it could be anything, like I mentioned, breathing before, so check in with your breathing. It could be, for example, you're not getting a lot of saliva in your mouth, right? It could be that your pupils are quite big. It could be, because basically if we're looking for danger, our pupils will get bigger. It could be that you need to go to the bathroom a lot. It could be that you don't go enough, right? It could be that you have a lot of tension in your muscles. So these are all signs of the nervous system being out of balance.
And a lot of them are quite subtle signs, right? And things that we could potentially get used to quite easily. It's like, I just need to run to the bathroom every hour because I drink too much water or whatever. Again, you're making excuses in your head.
Yes, exactly. So often people will attribute it to something that isn't necessarily the cause, right? It's like, for example, a lot of people come to me and they'll be like, well, I wake up multiple times during the night to go to the bathroom and I've been told I have a small bladder. And I'll be like, so how do you know you have a small bladder? Like, because I go to the bathroom a lot. Well, that doesn't mean you have a small bladder. So another sign of the nervous system being out of balance can be the frequent need to urinate, whether that's daytime or nighttime, right? So people often attribute it to things that aren't necessarily actually, like the small bladder thing. It's not necessarily true. So to try to step back and look at the bigger picture. So you kind of want to look for clusters of things. So if you've got high, fast, elevated breathing, maybe you have digestive issues, that's another symptom, and maybe you have a lot of energy in your system, you feel quite wired. These are examples of things that if you sort of cluster these things together, that's a good start to get an insight into, maybe my nervous system's out of balance.
Yeah. Okay, where do I book in? I think I need to sign up.
You could even do that. Do a before and after. Your listeners might be interested.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you're talking about it all, it's like, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's... You're kind of realizing all those things that you're kind of holding, And it's not even that I'm stressed about it, but obviously my system's still stressed.
Yeah, you may not
because I don't feel overwhelmed necessarily, not all the time at least. Sometimes I do, but I don't constantly feel overwhelmed. But obviously, my system still has to handle a lot of things.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It will show up for people in different ways. So some people it will feel like overwhelm. For some other people, it will feel like anxiety. And what I heard you say before was you're on, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's how it shows up for you.
Yeah.
So it'll show up in different ways. Yeah. Some people do stress, some do anxiety. Some people are just, constantly switched on. So it shows up in different ways.
Yeah. So you also mentioned before, that the energetic body is really important for sleep, and when the energetic body is out of alignment. And one of the examples was, the spine, we talked about the chiropractor. What are some other energetic things that we can do, that we can work on in order to regulate our nervous system and, to make sure that our energetic body is calm and collected, so to speak?
And again, it's about being able to move between fast and slow,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So for example, when we talk about the energetic body, so emotions are energy in motion in the body, and then the brain waves are the energy of the brain. So to be able to get deep, consistent quality sleep, it's important to be able to shift into that slow brainwave state. So we call it delta. And a lot of people, part of, not being able to achieve deep sleep can be, the brain's forgotten how to get into that slow brainwave pattern, right? So again, another thing to be retrained. And just like people, when they have a racing mind, one of the things they can do is change how they think, but then also slow their brainwaves down, because we kind of have a thought for, every time we've got a peak in the brainwave, there's another thought. So if your brainwaves are going really fast, it's like the brain's talking to you very quickly. Whereas,
that's literally me.
Right.
That's me. Like,
right.
That's what really resonates with me. I've got like a million things going through my head at all times.
Yes. Yeah. So if we got you into a slow brainwave state, that would you'd be like, your brain would just slow down and just be more relaxed. You wouldn't have all of those thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things about energy, why energy is important. So retraining the brain how to get into that slow brainwave state required for deep sleep, and also just required for relaxation during the day. And then there's the energetics of the body. So we talked about the spine being in alignment, because that basically will determine how it's connected to the nervous system again. But also emotions. A lot of people today are very much in their heads. We'll kind of have a little joke about how we can be walking heads rather than being embodied. And it's really helpful when people start to reconnect to the body, which we disconnect to with stress and trauma and all those kinds of things. To reconnect to the body, because we actually relax through our body, not so much through the brain. We relax through the body. So the more we're aware of the sensations of the body, our emotional state, then we can influence it, right? If our body's like, contracted and wired, well, if we're not aware of that happening, we can't change it, right? Yeah. So, like I've mentioned a few times, awareness is always the first step.
Yeah.
And then just like slowing down the brain waves, it's also important to shift the energetic pattern of the body so that it can also slow down.
See, that's where I feel like meditation has helped me a lot. Like I'm a Vedic meditator, and I meditate 20 minutes twice a day. Yeah. And that's something where I really take the time to slow myself down. Yeah. And, just concentrate on my mantra. And that has made a huge difference for me. I find, just giving myself that space.
Yeah, beautiful. And meditation is definitely a way that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Because I work with a lot of people who are chronic insomniacs, they will often say to me they can't meditate, right? Because their brain is just too busy.
Yeah.
So meditation can be really helpful to a lot of people. Some people, it's really difficult. So it's really important for people to find something that slows their brainwaves down. And, that can be anything from, joining a drum circle, right? We've got a beautiful drum circle here in Bondi, okay?
Yeah. Sunday afternoons.
Sunday afternoons, join us, guys. So, things like that will help to slow the brainwaves down, right? Maybe that rhythmic beat. It could be, what are some other examples? Listening to classical music during the day while you're working, just having it on in the background. There's so many things we can do that really don't require a lot of effort. And something like the drum circle, okay, you go to that instead of going to a coffee shop, So they're things that don't necessarily take extra time. They're just different choices.
Yeah. And it's just about finding the thing that works for you, right?
Exactly.
And where you feel like the effect as well.
Exactly, yeah. That's right. So another example might be doing art. That's another thing that really gets us into, losing track of space and time and getting into the flow of things and slows the brainwaves down. So that may work for someone else. There's so many different things. Or creative cooking, for example. So there's so many different ways we can do it. And like you say, it's just to find that thing that resonates with you.
What is it that relaxes you, right? Where you really feel like you can let go.
Yeah, and you'll know because your brain's not going at a million miles an hour, right?
How about exercise? Because so often you hear people go like, you should exercise if you can't sleep.
It helps, sure, but it's sort of, some people won't like this response. Basically, it's not one of the more important things actually in today's society, I'm going to say. Yeah. So sure, it's good because it helps to shift our hormones. It helps to, create endorphins and a lot of the feel-good hormones. And also it actually breaks our body down, which helps to put the body into a deeper state of sleep at night, because the body needs to then repair, right?
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean it will, because you could exercise, but if your nervous system's out of balance, you're just going to break your body down and you're not getting the repair time at night. So yes, it's helpful, but it on its own is just not enough. So it almost
can be the double whammy of like exercising and then not getting enough rest time at all.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, because with exercise you so often hear like, oh, just exercise because then you're exhausted and then you'll sleep well, right? But like what you're saying is sometimes it can almost be counterintuitive to the healing process of the physical body.
Yeah, if your nervous system's out of balance and you don't get into that deep sleep, you've just broken your body down. And
yeah.
So it's important to have a holistic approach to sleep. And when I say holistic, what I mean by that is approach it from multiple different angles.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, approaching it physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, and some people this may resonate with, and potentially spiritually as well. There's a lot of spiritual things that happen when we sleep. But so if you're just trying to resolve sleep issues from one narrow angle, unless you are already quite a good sleeper, that's just not going to be enough. Yeah, like just exercising to fix your sleep. Great. If that's not the cause of your struggle with sleep, if the cause of your struggle with sleep is not lack of activity, then it's unlikely that that's going to be what resolves it, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I find is so common when people come to me. They're like, I was told I need to, say, for example, only sleep between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. And it's like, well, was the cause of your sleep issues because you were sleeping outside those hours? No. So people like that often need to just grab any sleep they can get. It doesn't matter what the time is. So often the solution that a lot of people are advised does not connect in with the cause. And that's why I say to people to really check in with themselves. What is the cause of my struggle with sleep? You may or may not know, but don't use a remedy that isn't matched to the cause. Otherwise, it's just not going to work for you,
What is a very common cause that you see in your practice why people can't sleep, and what's then the solution for that?
I mean, the most common things are racing mind, anxiety, stress. I mean, they're kind of the big ones, right? Again, comes back to the nervous system.
Yeah.
And so when I say nervous system, this is not a one-pronged approach. We work with physical, mental, emotional, energetic to bring the nervous system back into balance, right? So an overactive mind is a sign, for example, of being sympathetic dominant, so being in that fight-flight response. So then the brain waves will move faster. There'll be excess energy produced in the body, which makes it harder to sleep. There may be that feeling of being wired in the body. So it's going to play out and it'll create stress hormones. So there's a cascade of things and they're all actually connected to each other. Yeah. So sometimes when people don't understand the bigger picture and they're just focusing on one element, they're missing that bigger picture. Right? And I remember one of my mentors years ago when I was first trying to figure all this out said, it's really important to address the issue on at least 2 to 3 levels for it to resolve. If people try on just one level, it won't. And what he said was so true. Yeah, so it's really important for us to look at the bigger picture, look at things holistically, how things fit in together. And I'm going to say, unfortunately, a lot of the time in science, that's missing because it can be a very narrow approach at times.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, when you're talking about all the different levels, and I'm really intrigued about the spiritual level there.
How deep do you want to go?
How much longer do we have?
I will speak about this. And one of the reasons that, look, I've been working in this a long time now and I still love my work. And one of the reasons is because it just keeps on growing. And part of that is the spiritual aspect. So what I mean by that is, so when people struggle with sleep, usually, not always, but often, they're going through a dark night of the soul. Something's happened that's triggered something in their life. It could be a divorce. It could be they've been made redundant at work. It could be an issue with family, something. Often something's triggered something in their life. Or, they've had a trauma, say, for example. And so their view of the world just suddenly goes haywire. The world doesn't make sense anymore. So this is the dark night of the soul, right? And there's a lot of stress that's created in that process. So To me, working with people with sleep is so beautiful because there's a holding people's hand through that process of moving from one stage to the next, where then they can start to make sense of the world again. And there's a really beautiful growth of the human spirit in that process. To me, that's very touching and very moving.
That's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, and so people will often shift a stage of consciousness when they're dealing with their sleep issues. So I often say sleep can be the path to waking up.
I love
a pathway. Yeah.
I really love that, yeah.
And then, of course, there's the whole side of what happens to us when we sleep. I would say that we connect in with Source, you know, but everyone will have different beliefs around that. But I would say there is a spiritual component to sleep, you know. Where do we go when we sleep, you know?
Definitely.
So having good quality sleep also enhances our connection to the divine or to, you know, the creator, whatever you want to call that greater force.
Yeah.
I would say that's where we go when we're asleep.
I love that very much. I was just thinking what comes up for me when you're talking about that, because I mean, I agree with all of what you said, you know, around the stages of the consciousness shifts that could happen, the, you know, diving into or connecting into the divine or whatever you want to call it, you know. My head kind of goes to where do we go, you know? And how does that then replenish it for the day ahead again, you know?
Yeah, so, you know, where do we go? So my theory is that we are connecting into the mains at night. You know, if you look at the energy patterns of sleep, our brain waves slow right down.
Yeah.
The time that we connect in with Source is when it's like that 0 point energy field, right? So to me, we connect in with Source energy, the mains. We connect in with that at night. And that's why we feel so energized the next day. We've actually literally plugged into the mains. So, you know, that's just my take on it. I can't prove it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting. We say we connect into
it
Source.
would make sense, right? And then if you connect in with it, you have that energy for the next day and, you know, you're all good. And if you don't, then you're lacking something, you know.
Yeah. And also the healing and the regeneration. Of course, when we connect back into Source, that's when we heal and regenerate.
Yeah.
So, you know, that, if I can dare say it, that sacred energy, you know, that heals.
Yeah.
And that is Source energy.
Definitely. Beautiful.
But I understand, look, that may not sit with everyone's belief system.
Yeah.
So that's just, you know, that's my take on it.
Yeah.
But regardless, sleeping well is important to our health and vitality.
It recharges you in one way or another. It doesn't matter who you connect with or to at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
It's like you do need it.
Yeah.
So let's envisage somebody who sleeps really well, who thinks they sleep well, but who actually sleep well. How can they even better their sleep, you know? I know we've been talking about sleep hygiene and what are some of the things that we can do. So if somebody is actually genuinely sleeping well, what are still some of the things that can, you know, help them sleep well, you know? And we've talked about that a little bit before, but is it that like no coffee 10 hours before you go to bed? Is it the cold shower in the morning and the cold or warm shower in the evening? I've heard different things there. What are some of the things that people can do in terms of an outsourced thing, you know, in order to sleep better? So not internal work. I think we've established how important the internal work is and that's really the main work that we need to do in order to, you know, sleep well.
Yeah.
But what are some of the external things that we can do as well?
Yeah, and with people, usually they'll fit into one of two categories. They'll either be poor sleepers and we've just got to get their sleep back to a baseline level, and then there's a whole other group of people who want to optimize their sleep because they understand how important good quality sleep is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
This is for my husband.
For your husband, yeah, okay. All right. So if you're already sleeping well and you just want to take it to the next level. So there's a lot of things you can do. And you're talking about the external environment. So when we sleep, one of the main functions, so we heal and regenerate, we're also detoxifying, right? Now, this is so important in the world that we live in today. We are surrounded by pollutants, toxins, all of this kind of thing. Now, if you do things to encourage and support your body in facilitating overnight, that will help you get better deep sleep, right? So for example, I take it's a special zeolite with different things before I go to bed because I know that's going to help me optimize my detoxification process at night. And it will also help me to go into an even deeper sleep. I'm going to give you some links to some things if you want. There's things like earthing is really important. So anything that optimizes detoxification will help people to get into a deeper sleep. So also one issue today, in terms of the external environment is all the EMF radiation out there, and it's becoming a big issue. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of earthing, getting the EMFs or minimizing the EMFs at night time as much as possible. So that could be anything from having an earthing sheet to, during the day also working with earthing mats, but also things like having your phone not on airplane mode, actually either off or in a little, what do they call them, like a Faraday bag. That's what I do. So there's zero signal. You can turn your Wi-Fi off, that's an option. I know it's inconvenient, but ideally you would do that. So another thing in terms of our external environment is our water these days and it came out in the news recently, right? It's really not that clean. There's a lot of pollutants in there, and by design there is fluoride in the water, right? Now the issue with fluoride is that it calcifies the pineal gland. So our pineal gland is so important to our sleep because it produces melatonin. Melatonin, and actually there's a crossover with spirituality there, but we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. Melatonin is basically our sleep and relaxation hormone. So if our pineal gland is calcified from years and years of drinking fluoridated water, then we will not produce as much melatonin, which is essential to deep restorative sleep. So, this is another thing people say, oh, well, I'm getting older, so I don't sleep so well. Well, if you spent 50 years drinking fluoridated water, well, okay, you're probably not going to be producing much melatonin. So it's not because you're getting older, it's because it's because of the buildup of these things. So I encourage people to start early on, cutting out things like that. Make sure you get a good water filter, get rid of that fluoride and all the other toxins in the water. You want to optimize your melatonin levels. It's so important to sleep. It is your sleep hormone. So when we're stressed, when we're drinking fluoridated water, our melatonin levels go down. So another, in terms of the environment, going out into the sun is really important, right? Make sure you get sunlight every day. That also affects our melatonin levels at night. The level of blue light we're exposed to these days is a lot through all our devices. So it's so important to have an app on your computer or your devices that blocks out the blue light, especially from dusk to dawn. You want to kind of try to follow the cycles of our natural environment. Sometimes I'll see my friends' phones at night and I can't even look at them. I'm like, get that away from me, because it is like this it's like looking at the sun, and it's so bad for your circadian rhythm and your melatonin levels. So block out the blue light, and there's apps on the phones, on laptops, that it's very easy to do now. So just really make sure
You'll have to share some of those links, and I'll share it with our listeners as well.
Sure, yeah, and it's all free, this stuff, it's easy to do and it's free, but I'm happy to share some links so people can do that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So there's some really basic environmental things to take care of. Yeah.
So, Elina, tell us a little bit about the Sleep Expert program, that you started, and how you are supporting people out there to get this amazing night of sleep, What does that involve? And you've obviously studied so many things and brought all those things together to really support people in a holistic way. So really keen to hear about what that entails.
Yeah, so anyone who's really struggling with sleep, who actually wants to get their sleep back on track and do it quickly, because it's really hard to do it on our own. I do offer an 8-week program. So in 8 weeks, it's basically get consistent 7+ hours of consistent quality sleep in 60 days or less, and that's without the use of sleeping aids. So over 8 weeks, we cover all the kinds of things we spoke about today, nervous system, brain waves, sleep mindset, sleep strategies, habitual thinking patterns, all those kinds of things, and really bring the nervous system back into balance so that people can get a really good night's sleep. And it's really working with, like I said, the root causes of people's struggle with sleep. So, I find time and time again, unless people work with the root cause, their sleep doesn't change, or it only changes temporarily. I'm not interested in that. I want to help people transform their sleep permanently so they sleep well for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And to me, the gift in that, when people are sleeping well, they really can bring the best of them forward. Yourself, when you're sleeping well, you're showing up your best self. And so then when people are sleeping well, they can really bring their best self to this planet. And that's what, I love that, because I see that at the end of the 8 weeks, people they're so much happier, they're inspired, they're loving life again. That's how critical sleep is to our functioning. And then they can bring their best gifts forward. So that's what we do over the 8 weeks, is really address the root cause of someone's struggle with sleep. And it can be done either one-on-one, private, or in a group setting. Yeah. And it's all online, so people can do it anywhere in the world. I have clients all over the world, which is really lovely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, Elina, how important do you think that deep personal and collective healing is in the world that we are living in today?
Oh, beautiful question. Personal and collective healing. Well, it's how we evolve, isn't it? So, I guess it depends. What do you call healing? But on a personal and collective level, it's how we continue to grow and evolve as humans. So, do we want to be stagnant, or do we want to keep on evolving? I, for one, want to keep on evolving. I'm so committed to that. So I'm not quite sure exactly what else, you'd like in that answer, but to me it's really quite simple. It's about evolution and really reaching our potential as humans, like you say, individually and collectively. And, we need to evolve individually so the collective evolves. One doesn't happen without the other, right? So, but I think that's why we're here.
100%.
Yeah. And that's joyful. Growth is painful, but also joyful. Yeah. It's both together. And that's the human experience. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Elina. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom and your expertise and your knowledge with us on this really, really important topic called sleep.
I've loved being with you, Sylvia. It's so lovely to talk with you, and you've asked some really great questions today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. The Soul Sunshine community, so to speak. So the 3 pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from today, the first one is really the importance of the nervous system when it comes to sleep. We might think that all the external things that we think about, it's like the coffees, the cold showers, whatever, we're being told out there are the things that are going to make us sleep or make us not sleep. But really it is a regulated nervous system. That's the most important thing in order for us to get a restful night of sleep. The second pearl of wisdom is the holistic approach when it comes to sleeping, looking at all the physical, the emotional, the mental, the energetic and the spiritual body, and working on at least 3 of those ones in order to really see a shift and a change in your sleep. And then the third one was the importance of the detoxification in the body, and the fact that there is like the internal detoxification, which Elina talked so beautifully about, through the breathing, the cerebral spinal fluid travels up through our spine into our brain. And then at night when we sleep, it detoxifies our brain. And if we're not breathing well during the day, so if we don't have a good day, then that fluid doesn't go up and therefore it doesn't detoxify that brain. So that's the internal one, but then there's also external things that can be done, like, what Elina talked about, like earthing and, turning your phone off, not just on airplane mode, making sure that you get enough melatonin, that you get enough sunlight, etc. So there's lots of little things that you can do. So these are the 3 pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from today, together with all the other really important and interesting things that Elina has shared with us today. So, Elina, tell us how people can find you and how people can get in touch with you if what they've heard today really interests them, and if they're intrigued, and if they just want to, get in touch with you to have a chat about how you could support them as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So my website is www.thesleepexpert.com. So you can find me there. For your listeners, I'm happy to offer a complimentary sleep breakthrough session. So that's where we really dive in and uncover what's the root cause of your struggle with sleep, because you can't resolve your sleep issues unless you know what that is. So we can perhaps provide the link for that.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, otherwise I'm not that active on social media because I value my sleep too much these days and I don't have time to do everything. But my handles are at the.sleep.expert, that's Insta, and I think Facebook's the same, so you can find me there as well.
Amazing, awesome. Thank you so much. We'll put all your information obviously in the show notes, as well as some of the links that you'll share with the listeners as well, where they can get some of the products and things that you've talked about today in order to support their sleep as well. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope you got something out of this episode today. Elina has such a huge wealth of, wisdom and knowledge that she's built plainly from going through the struggle of insomnia herself and trying to find solutions out there in the world and not finding them, and therefore just turning around and creating it all on her own. So if that has resonated with you, please do get in touch with her and have this complimentary chat and see how she can help you, turn your sleep around and therefore turn your life around as well. Please do share the podcast with your family, with your friends, or anyone you think might benefit from this information today. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.